Well, to reintroduce myself, my name is Howard Garrett, and I am an orca nerd. That's a thing, it really is. And it goes way back. Actually, it goes back to the early 80s when I first volunteered as a field researcher with Orca Survey, which soon became the Center for Whale Research on San Juan Island. And our job was photo identification. So we went out and took photos of the whales, which meant we paralleled them at a nice slow idle and took their photos. And those were documented and went into the database, and that's how it was all compiled. But also we learned about them. We saw them. I did. I was fresh from the Rockies at that time. And I began to just appreciate these whales are amazing. They're fascinating. And at the same time, I was reading up on all the science, which there wasn't much, so it wasn't that hard. But the first results were in of their communities, their families, their intricate social lives and family lives, and their lifetime cohesion, and the different communities, the residents and the transients, and their diets, and their communications. Dana was talking about orcas talking to each other. Yeah, they do. And that all just fascinated me, got me in pretty deep. I became a nerd back in the early 80s, and I still am. And it is really kind of like discovering intelligent life on Earth. It still is. Every time you see them, you know, I mean, it's not just that they're huge and they're graceful and they're so in control, they're masters of their universe, but they're also so highly developed. Their cognitive and cultural capabilities, once you sort of read the background info, it's just astounding and fascinating, never lets up. So I still am, but we have to live in the real world, and there are some real issues, some real problems that we need to look at. And so I don't have time to go into the glorious and amazing natural history of orcas here, but I do want to cover some of the recent trends. And those are that there's been a complete regime shift. It's very, very weird. Back in the early 80s, we were out with them more than 100 days a year, between April and September, almost constantly. But in 2017, the residents were around the San Juans only about 36 days, well, exactly, as far as reports, compared to 75 days in 2016, which itself was lower than normal. But for some reason, probably prey-related, the southern residents have been in Puget Sound 28 times since September, beginning October 1, and into January already. They have been in Puget Sound 28 times versus 11 in 2016. So there's something here for them. We assume it's a whole lot of chum. That's their side dish. Of course, they specialize in Chinook, but they will eat chum and also coho on the side, occasionally in the summer. Meanwhile, at the same time, and we never saw transients back in the early 80s. I mean, rarely. People knew about them, but it was a pretty rare occasion. But in 2017, transients were in the Salish Sea 280 days, sometimes 45 at a time. We never saw more than 3 or 4, maybe 5. And more than 225 individuals were seen in 2017. The previous high was 175. So this sums it up. Ken Balcom, director and founder of the Center for Whale Research, all indications are pointing toward a predator population that is prey limited and non-viable. We have an issue. So to get a little perspective on it, this is a population graph going back to when the studies started in '76 on the US side. And you can see right here, there was a drastic drop-off between the mid-90s and 2000, 2001 of about 20% of the population, which is what triggered the ESA listing finally in 2005. It set off all kinds of alarm bells, state and federal levels. But here's where we are today, only 76. That's less than there was at the trough, at the bottom, after the die-off. And the fewest that there have been since 1984. And the trend is not good. It's downward. So what's going on? How do you find out what's killing the killer whales, is the saying. Well, who do you call? Tucker. Tucker and his trainees, who have led researchers to fecal matter that is left behind from orcas when they go by, which yields amazing books of information about stress levels and hormones, in particular pregnancies, that tell you just all kinds of amazing information about them, just really fill you in on the state of them. And that study, I think it began in 2009, it was just published this past summer, and our local South Whidbey Record picked up the story, and this was their headline. It's about right. UW study pins orca pregnancy problems on lack of salmon. That's the short version. The paper itself, population growth, etc., you can read it right there. Impacts on pregnancy success. And what they found is really shocking. 69% of the pregnancies never resulted in a calf, failed. That's a lot of investment of the health of the mother invested in a calf that didn't make it in time. They only, at best, have a calf about every 3 years, more like an average of 5 or more years. And in the study it says, low availability of Chinook is endangering the health of reproductive females and lowering birth rates. And there are two main Chinook runs that the southern residents have historically, certainly since records have been kept, depended on from the Columbia River Basin, the whole Columbia and Snake River basins, and the Fraser River in the summer. And both of those are in seriously bad shape. As the author, Sam Wasser, said, it's about the fish. And one of the things we need to look seriously at is what is the impact of Snake River dams on Chinook. This takes a little explaining. I don't have time for it all, but those 4 dams on the lower Snake River block passage, mainly downstream by the smolts, by the little ones who don't swim. They orient upstream and flow downstream, and those dams create 140 miles of slackwater reservoir. Stops them. So they don't go anywhere. So how do you look at it? Well, fish statistics are incredibly complex, but this is the best way to measure a trend, is the smolt to adult ratio. And this is for 2 runs, the Snake River, well, you can see it up there, the Snake River Fall Chinook and the Snake River Summer and Spring Chinook. And as you can see, there are 2 blue lines, and the lower blue line is at about 2% return. And that is considered to be the minimum to just replace, just to stand still and have the same number of fish year after year. 2%. 4% is considered what's needed to begin to restore, to grow that population back. And you can see the trends. They're way, way down there. Less than 1% most years. grab here, but I had to get something to show you. So what are you going to do about it? Well, about a month ago, a group of us got together and concocted a plan and a strategy and a sort of information campaign, and we came up with this. This is a full-page ad that appeared in the Seattle Times and the Olympian and the Peninsula Daily News. And just so you can see what it really looked like, that's it in the paper. Big ad. So that's the launch of a campaign, and you can see it in the headline, what we're talking about, the dams, and our targets for how to do something is to contact Senator Murray and Governor Inslee. But what's also in here is the clearing up of a misconception that is almost universal. I mean, among politicians, media, academics, the public in general has just believed for decades that to remove those dams, because they are federal dams operated by the Army Corps of Engineers, you have to get congressional approval. You have to go through Congress. What are the chances of that? Not good. But you don't. People have been thinking you can't do anything because you'd have to go through Congress, and they won't, but you don't. It's actually completely under the authority of the Army Corps of Engineers and the Bonneville Power Authority. And they can remove those dams. In fact, in 2002, there was an environmental impact statement that had as alternative number 4, dam removal. And it's not even expensive. You don't have to blow up concrete like the Elwha. You just bulldoze out some of the earthen berms that are alongside each one of them, and you have a free-flowing river again. Of course, there's some other infrastructure, and it's not that simple, but it's not really expensive or complicated. It can be done. So that's our campaign, and you may be hearing more about that, but I just wanted to fill you in on that because you may get a chance to help. So I'll just leave you with this beautiful map of the Salish Sea. I love it for two main reasons. Well, for one thing, it leaves out all the cities and roads and boundaries and all that stuff that just clutter up a good map. But also, it shows the watershed. It outlines where the water flows in from. So that's all the upstream that affects the downstream. Water flows downhill. So it neatly outlines that and shows what we need to protect really is not just the water, but the Salish watershed. But the other thing that I really like about it that's probably inadvertent is that right down there on the bottom, let's see if I can make this work, is the Columbia River, the mouth of the Columbia. And so that's where the orcas have been when they have been studied. There's not a lot of data, but that seems to be where they primarily hang out when they're not in the inland waters. And that is to get those salmon that are going up the Columbia. And about half of those salmon historically have gone up the Snake River. So it's very important for them. And this map just sort of neatly portrays the essential habitat, the range of the southern residents. Of course, all the inland sea, all the way up to Johnstone Strait, and out in the south part of Vancouver Island and down to the Columbia. They will go further south and further north, of course, but that is 90-some% of their time is spent in that area. So I just sort of wanted to featurize that's what we have to protect and restore and bring back and treasure and just value with everything we can. Okay. Do I have any time? Okay, no time, but we'll do Q&A later, and I'll be around so we can talk about that.